We were celebrating our anniversary when my girlfriend's little brother asked, "Can you teach me to drive?" "Maybe another time, buddy. Your sister and I are kind of busy right now," I said, trying to keep my voice friendly, while Sophia and I were literally about to cut into our anniversary cake at her family's house. Her mom had insisted on hosting our 2-year celebration with the whole family. Sophia's face changed instantly. Her smile disappeared, and she put down her fork with this look I'd never seen before. "Are you serious right now, Garrett?" Her little brother Isaiah stood there holding his learner's permit, and his face fell. He mumbled, "Sorry," and walked away toward the stairs, looking crushed. Sophia stood up from the table so fast her chair scraped across the floor, and everyone went quiet. "I can't believe you just did that to him," she said, and her voice was shaking. I looked around at her family, all staring at me with these expressions like I'd just kicked a puppy. Her dad put down his coffee mug harder than necessary. Her mom actually gasped. Sophia grabbed her purse and said she needed air, then walked out the back door into the yard. I sat there completely confused because I'd just said maybe later to a driving lesson, not murdered someone. Her cousin Dante, who was sitting across from me, shook his head and said, "Man, you really don't get it, do you?" I asked what I was supposed to get, and he just stood up and followed Sophia outside. Her mom started clearing plates without looking at me, and her dad excused himself to the living room. Within 2 minutes, the whole family had dispersed, and I was sitting alone at the table with our half-eaten anniversary cake. I pulled out my phone and texted Sophia asking what just happened, but she left me on read. After about 20 minutes, her mom came back into the dining room and sat down across from me with her arms crossed. She said Isaiah had been practicing with his permit for 3 months and specifically wanted to ask me today because he looked up to me. She said I'd embarrassed him in front of the whole family by brushing him off like he didn't matter. I tried to explain that Sophia and I were celebrating our anniversary, and I'd just meant I could teach him another day, but her mom cut me off. She said family comes first always, and if I couldn't understand that, then maybe I wasn't ready to be serious with Sophia. Then she left the room and I heard her go upstairs. I sat there for another 10 minutes before Sophia finally came back inside. Her eyes were red like she'd been crying, and she wouldn't look at me. I stood up and tried to put my arm around her, but she stepped away. She said we should go home and talk there, so we got our stuff and left without saying goodbye to anyone. The drive back to our apartment was completely silent, except for the sound of her sniffling. When we got inside, she immediately went to the bedroom and closed the door. I stood in the living room feeling like I'd entered the twilight zone. I knocked on the bedroom door and asked if we could please talk about this. She opened it and said there was nothing to talk about because my priorities were clear. I asked what that meant, and she said if I couldn't take 20 minutes to help her little brother on our anniversary, then I obviously didn't value her family. I pointed out that we were literally in the middle of celebrating when he asked, and she said that's exactly when family shows up for each other. She said Isaiah had been nervous all day about asking me, and I'd shot him down without even thinking about it. The more she talked, the more I realized this wasn't just about the driving lesson. This felt way bigger. I asked her point blank if something else was going on, and she said this was about me showing my true colors. She said her last boyfriend had been selfish and never made time for her family, and she'd promised herself she wouldn't settle for that again. I tried to explain that I wasn't being selfish. I just wanted to finish celebrating with her first, but she wasn't hearing it. She said I should leave and stay at my friend's place tonight because she needed space. I grabbed some clothes and my toothbrush and left, completely blindsided by how a simple, maybe later, had turned into me getting kicked out of our apartment. I drove to my friend Kevin's place, and he let me crash on his couch. When I told him what happened, he looked confused and said it seemed like a massive overreaction. He asked if maybe Sophia's family had some kind of thing about respecting the younger siblings or something. I had no idea, but the whole situation felt insane. I texted Sophia goodnight and said I loved her, but she didn't respond. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Sophia's best friend Jade saying she couldn't believe what I'd done to Isaiah and that Sophia deserved better. I stared at that message trying to figure out how everyone knew about this already. I texted Jade back asking what she'd heard, and she said Sophia had called her crying last night saying I'd humiliated her brother at their anniversary dinner. I tried to explain my side, but Jade said there was no excuse for being dismissive to a kid who just wanted help. She blocked me before I could respond. I called Kevin and told him about Jade's text, and he said it sounded like Sophia's family was turning everyone against me. He suggested I try to talk to Isaiah directly and apologize, which seemed like a good idea. I texted Sophia asking for Isaiah's number, and surprisingly, she sent it to me. I called Isaiah, and he answered on the third ring, sounding hesitant. I apologized for how I'd responded yesterday, and explained that I'd been caught off guard during our celebration, but I'd love to teach him to drive whenever he was free. Isaiah was quiet for a second before saying he appreciated the apology, but his dad had already told him not to ask me for anything anymore. My stomach dropped, because now Sophia's dad was involved, and apparently had decided I was a bad influence or something. I asked Isaiah if we could still do the driving lesson, and he said he'd have to ask his parents first. He sounded uncomfortable, and we hung up pretty quickly. I texted Sophia saying I'd apologized to Isaiah and offered to teach him, and she responded asking why I couldn't have just said yes yesterday. I said because we were celebrating our anniversary, and I wanted that moment with her, and she said that proved I didn't understand what it meant to be part of her family. I asked if we could meet up and talk in person, and she agreed to meet me at the park near our apartment in an hour. When I got there, she was already sitting on a bench looking exhausted. I sat down next to her and said I was really confused about why this had blown up so big. She turned to me and said her family had a rule that you never say no when someone asks for help, especially the younger kids. She said it was how they were raised, and it was non-negotiable. I asked why she'd never mentioned this rule before, and she said she didn't think she needed to, because it should be common sense to help family. I pointed out that I'd said, maybe later, not no, but she said it was the same thing to them because I'd dismissed the request instead of immediately agreeing. I asked if this was some kind of test, and her face got hard. She said everything isn't a test. Sometimes people just show you who they are through their actions. We sat there in silence for a few minutes before she said she needed more time to think about our relationship. I asked if she was breaking up with me over a driving lesson, and she said it wasn't about the driving lesson. It was about whether I could be the kind of person her family needed me to be. She stood up and left before I could say anything else. I sat on that bench for probably another hour, trying to wrap my head around how my life had fallen apart in 24 hours. When I finally went back to Kevin's place, he could tell from my face that the conversation hadn't gone well. I told him everything Sophia had said about her family's rule, and he said that seemed like cult behavior. He asked if I'd noticed any other weird family rules or dynamics, and I realized I hadn't really paid that much attention before. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I started scrolling through old photos and videos from family gatherings with Sophia's family. I noticed something I'd never picked up on before. In every video where someone asked for something, whoever was asked immediately dropped what they were doing to help. Sophia's dad was literally mid-sentence in one video when her aunt asked him to grab something from the car, and he just stopped talking and went to get it without finishing his thought. In another video, Sophia's mom was opening presents on her birthday when one of the kids asked for help with homework, and she put down her present and went to help without hesitation. I started to see the pattern. This family operated on this unspoken rule that any request from family was immediately the top priority, no matter what else was happening. I showed the videos to Kevin, and he said that explained why they all reacted so intensely. To them, I'd violated a fundamental family law. The next day, I got a call from Sophia's dad. He said we needed to have a conversation man to man and asked if I could come by the house. I agreed and drove over there feeling nervous. When I arrived, he was waiting on the front porch. He gestured for me to sit in the chair next to him, and we sat there in uncomfortable silence for a minute. Then he started talking about how his family had been through a lot when he was growing up. His parents had divorced when he was young, and both had been pretty neglectful. He said he and his siblings had to rely on each other for everything, and they'd made a pact that when they had their own families, they'd always be there for each other no matter what. He said that pact had extended to how they raised their kids. Every family member was taught from birth that family requests came first, because that's what kept them strong and connected. I listened and said I understood where he was coming from, but I also hadn't known about this unspoken rule. He nodded and said that was fair, but now that I knew, I needed to decide if I could live by it. He said Sophia's last boyfriend had known about the rule and still refused to follow it, which is why that relationship ended. He looked at me with these serious eyes and said, if I wanted to be with Sophia long term, I needed to prove I could prioritize family the way they did. I asked him what that would look like, and he said it meant always saying yes when family needed something, no exceptions. I asked what if I was at work or in the middle of something important, and he said family comes before work, before hobbies, before everything. I sat there processing that and realized this was way bigger than I'd initially thought. This wasn't just about Isaiah wanting driving lessons. This was about whether I could completely restructure my priorities to fit their family system. I thanked him for explaining everything and said I needed to think about it. He said that was fine, but not to take too long because Sophia was already questioning whether we were compatible. I drove back to Kevin's place feeling overwhelmed. Kevin asked how it went, and I told him about the conversation. He said it sounded like Sophia's family was asking me to completely change who I was, and I needed to figure out if that was something I was willing to do. That night, I made a list of pros and cons. I loved Sophia and could see a future with her, but could I really commit to always dropping everything for family requests? What if we had kids and this rule extended to them? Would I be expected to cancel work meetings or miss important events because someone needed help moving furniture? The more I thought about it, the more trapped I felt. I called my mom and told her everything, and she was quiet for a long time before speaking. She said she understood the importance of family, but healthy families also respected boundaries and individual priorities. She said it sounded like Sophia's family had taken a good principle and turned it into an absolute rule that didn't allow for nuance. She asked me if I'd be happy living under that kind of pressure for the rest of my life. I said I didn't know, which was the honest answer. The next day, I decided to do something I probably should have done earlier. I reached out to Sophia's cousin Dante, who'd seemed sympathetic at the dinner. We met for coffee, and I asked him to be real with me about what it was like growing up in their family. Dante sighed and said it was complicated. He said the family rule about always helping had good intentions, but sometimes felt suffocating. He told me about missing his college graduation rehearsal because his uncle needed help fixing his car, and nobody thought twice about it because that's just how things worked. He said he'd learned to accept it, but admitted he sometimes resented the lack of personal autonomy. I asked Dante if anyone had ever tried to change the rule or push back against it, and he said Sophia's older brother had tried when he was in his 20s. The family had basically ostracized him until he apologized and fell back in line. Dante said the rule was so deeply ingrained that questioning it was seen as betraying the family. He looked at me and said, if I was going to be with Sophia, I needed to accept that this was package deal. The family came with the relationship, and their rules came with the family. I thanked Dante for being honest and left the coffee shop feeling even more conflicted. That evening, Sophia finally called me. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking, and she wanted to know where my head was at. I told her I'd talked to her dad and Dante, and I understood the family dynamic better now, but I was struggling with whether I could commit to always putting family requests first. She was quiet, and then said that answer told her everything she needed to know. I asked what she meant, and she said, if I was still struggling with it, then I wasn't the right person for her. I tried to explain that I wasn't saying no, I was just trying to be honest about my concerns, but she cut me off. She said her family had been right about me from the start, that I was too selfish to really be part of their world. Those words hit me like a punch, because I'd never thought of myself as selfish. I told her that wanting to finish celebrating our anniversary before teaching her brother to drive didn't make me selfish, it made me human. She said that's the difference between us. She would have immediately said yes, because family always comes first. We went back and forth for maybe 20 more minutes before she said she thought we should break up. I felt my chest get tight and asked if she was really ending our 2-year relationship over this. She said it wasn't just about this one incident, it was about our fundamental values being incompatible. She said she needed someone who understood her family's way of life without having to be convinced. We ended the call, and I just sat there in Kevin's living room feeling numb. Kevin came in and asked what happened, and when I told him, he said he was sorry, but maybe it was for the best. He said I would have been miserable trying to live up to their impossible standard. Over the next few days, I tried to process everything. I kept thinking about whether I'd made the wrong choice by not immediately agreeing to teach Isaiah. Maybe if I'd just said yes right away, none of this would have happened. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized Kevin and my mom were right. The family's rule didn't allow for any personal boundaries or priorities, and that wasn't sustainable. I decided to text Sophia one more time to say I respected her decision, but I wanted her to know I genuinely cared about her and her family. She responded saying she knew I cared, but caring wasn't enough when values didn't align. She said she hoped I'd find someone whose family was less demanding. That last part felt like a dig, but I left it alone. A week went by, and I started moving my stuff out of our apartment and into a new place. Kevin helped me load boxes into his truck, and we talked about everything that had happened. He said he'd seen this coming from early on because Sophia's family had always been kind of intense at gatherings. He said he'd just never wanted to say anything because I seemed happy. I told him I had been happy until I realized happiness came with a price tag of complete submission to family rules. About 2 weeks after the breakup, I ran into Isaiah at the grocery store. He looked uncomfortable when he saw me, but came over to say hi. I asked how he was doing, and he said he was good, that his uncle had been teaching him to drive. I told him I was glad he found someone to help, and I was sorry things had gotten so weird. Isaiah said it wasn't my fault, and that he felt bad about the whole situation. He said his family could be a lot sometimes, and he didn't blame me for walking away. That conversation stuck with me because even Isaiah, who was part of the family, recognized how intense they were. I texted Sophia later that day, saying I'd run into Isaiah, and he seemed to be doing well. She responded coldly, saying she was glad I'd moved on so quickly. I didn't respond because there was no point. She'd already decided I was the villain in her story. Another month passed, and I started dating again. I met someone named Bianca through a mutual friend, and she was so different from Sophia. Her family was close, but they respected boundaries. When I told Bianca the story about Sophia's family rule, she looked shocked and said that sounded exhausting. She said her family believed in helping each other, but not at the expense of personal priorities or commitments. Dating Bianca made me realize how unhealthy Sophia's family dynamic had been. I'd spent 2 years trying to navigate these unspoken rules and never quite measuring up. With Bianca, things felt easy and natural. There was no pressure to prove myself or constantly put her family's needs above my own. About 3 months after the breakup, I got a text from Dante asking if we could grab coffee again. When we met up, he told me that Sophia had started dating someone new, a guy named Aaron who'd grown up in a similar family system. Dante said Aaron already knew all the rules and was fitting in perfectly. I told Dante I was happy for Sophia, and I meant it. I'd realized we weren't right for each other, even though it had taken a painful breakup to see it. Dante said he wanted to apologize for how the family had treated me. He said, looking back, he could see that I'd been put in an impossible position and judged harshly for not knowing rules I'd never been told about. I appreciated the apology and told him no hard feelings. We ended up staying in touch and occasionally grabbed coffee to catch up. 6 months after the breakup, Kevin told me he'd heard through the grapevine that Sophia and Aaron had gotten engaged. I felt a weird mix of emotions hearing that. But mostly I felt relieved that I wasn't the one signing up for a lifetime of that family dynamic. Bianca asked if I was okay when I told her, and I said I genuinely was. I dodged a bullet without even realizing it at the time. A year after the breakup, I ran into Sophia at a mutual friend's wedding. We were cordial, but distant. She introduced me to Aaron, and he seemed nice enough, very eager to please and constantly checking his phone like he was waiting for a family member to need something. Sophia looked happy, though, and I was glad she'd found someone who fit her world. During the reception, Sophia's mom came up to me and surprisingly apologized. She said she'd been too harsh on me, and that she could see now that their family expectations were unrealistic for outsiders. She said they'd been working on loosening some of the rules after Sophia's older brother had a breakdown about the pressure. I thanked her for saying that and told her I held no grudges. Appreciate you watching this far. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.